Let me lower your expectations. Thanks, Drew. It's really nice. So I am married. Not bragging, but it's an accomplishment, and I've done it twice. Back in the middle of my first try, I once asked my father why he and Mom split up, and he said, "Well, you know, son, people change." And I asked Mom the same thing, and she said, "Oh, because people never change." Pretty much answered my question about them, anyway, right there. They met at the right close to the end of the war in Europe, World War II, in Austria. He was a 5'6" Scottish soldier. She was a 5'8" Yugoslavian refugee. They got married. They had 2 sons. They moved to America. They got divorced. I think what happened is once the Nazis were out of the picture, they finally had time to take a good look at each other. They kept him busy. So Dad moved away to a place, it's a single men's rooming house on 14th Street in Manhattan. And we stayed with Mom during the week in Queens and stayed at Dad's place on the weekends. It was a kind of place with a payphone and bathrooms, you know, down the hall, and kitchens back in Queens with their ex-wives. But I loved the place. It was almost like camping. And I loved Dad. I loved being with him. And I was proud of him because he wasn't just a tenant in this building. He was the super. So we went there like I said, every weekend. And since he was the super, we would help him most Saturdays. My older brother Artie and I would help him do the rounds into all the rooms, changing the linens. He called them linens like it was Buckingham Palace. But we would, you know, knock on a door. We'd give them fresh, clean sheets and towels and pick up their dirty old stuff. We'd start on the 2nd floor with a bag full of fresh linens and end on the 6th floor with a bag full of essentially nuclear waste. These weren't sheets like in detergent commercials. They were kind of the color of nicotine, and they were dappled with, you know, amber stains that could be coffee or bourbon or... I mean, these were like lonely men who spent a lot of time in bed reading magazines. So let me just say that Dad wouldn't let us play Ghost with these sheets. A couple of times, we would knock on a door, and there'd be no answer. So Dad would knock a couple more times, and then when there was still no answer, he would pull out his master key and let himself in, and sometimes we'd find a tenant in bed asleep, and sometimes we'd find a tenant in bed dead. And Dad would kind of put out his arms like a school crossing guard to keep us out. He was one of those fathers who was just full of aphorisms, like, you know, fear no man, never give up. And in this particular situation, he might say something like, well, you know, it's sad, but he probably lived a full, rich life. Even at 8 years old, which is the age I was then, I was still single. I knew that if you wound up in Dad's place, you had not lived a full, rich life. But Dad had become so sort of desensitized to this. He was so used to losing his tenants this way. I remember hearing him talking to friends down in his place and saying, well, you know, nobody lives forever. So this one weekend, my older brother and I are there. It's Christmas Eve. And Dad has just given us our gifts. And they are just freakishly unequal. I can tell before we open anything that I'm getting burned. I mean, the difference in sheer scale has me a little bit weepy. I'm sitting there holding a little kind of rectangular box wrapped in red and green foil paper, and I'm watching my brother Artie, who literally has to walk around his present. It's one of those kind of perfect, formless, bulky presents that says that, you know, mere simple geometry could never describe the wonders underneath this thing. And he rips it open. When he rips it open, it is a 30-gallon fish tank, aquarium, and it's surrounded by all the stuff. The pumps and the filters and the tubes and the rainbow gravel and a little skin diver and the plastic seaweed, everything but the fish. This is exactly what I wanted. I mean, starting at that point, after he got it. My dream gift. I opened mine, and it's a book. It's a black, blank-covered hard book. It looks like a textbook. It's like something a 40-year-old might like. And when I open it up, it is filled with the most just meticulously detailed illustrations of the most horrific images I've seen during my 8 years on the planet. There are devils with giant bat wings flying around, swinging human severed heads by the hair. There are men and women on fire. There are people eating other people. And everybody's naked. It's not even in color, It's not the Hardy Boys. So I tear my eyes away from the images to read the text. But I can't because it's in Italian or something. So to give Dad some credit, he knew that I liked books, especially books with pictures, because I drew a lot myself. But I, like most people, like you probably, I judged my gifts based on volume and mass alone. So I burst into tears. A lot of the kind of random gifts that we got from Dad came from other tenants in the building, indirectly. We would knock on, like I mentioned, we would knock on these doors, and occasionally we would find someone dead up there, and Dad would send us back downstairs, and while we were down in his place, he would use the payphone in the hall to call the police and report the latest vacancy. And while he waited for them, he would poke around in the guy's room, do a little shopping, and wind up back downstairs with a pillowcase full of things that eventually wound up under a Christmas tree or next to a birthday cake. I knew that the fish tank and the book came from this guy, Emil, who lived in apartment 4B. He was this really nice old foreign guy, and I knew they came from there because I had been in every room in the building at one time or another doing the rounds with the linens. He apparently had died about a week earlier. I guess the fish died a couple of days after that. So I know it wasn't Emil's fault, but I'm looking at this book, and I think, really, a book for Christmas? And I look over at Artie, I'm looking at my kind of like reading material, and looking at his Sea World over there. But I can tell that he is also a little disappointed, because I know he wanted like a BB gun. And I'm sure that he's thinking something like, what, you got me a bowl of water? and it's empty? And I kind of, I'm beginning to lose it and beginning to sob. And he takes my book and starts flipping through it. And I guess he sees all the pictures of naked women in there. Because he's older than I am and he's more mature. He says, I'll trade. I'll make the trade. And I look at Dad, and Dad looks at me, and I know I'm about to really hurt his feelings, and I don't want to. I love him, but I also know that I can get away with it because, children of divorced parents get cut a lot of slack, So we make the trade. I get the aquarium, Artie gets the book, everyone's happy, except maybe the fish that Dad bought me, because by New Year's Eve, they wound up belly up. The only thing exciting about having fish for a kid is feeding them. And it is very easy to overfeed those tiny little things. Well, I like to think that with all the food, they're very happy up until the very end. Years later, quite a few years later, Dad passed away, and Artie and I went back to the old place to kind of sort things out, and we both left with bags of mementos. The book was in Artie's bag. The next day, he calls me, and he says, "Hey, ever hear of this guy, Gustave Doré?" And I have, at this point in my life, I've gone to art school and stuff. So, you know, he was this famous 19th century French illustrator. And yeah. And I'm sort of waiting for the next shoe to drop, and I'm kind of think I know what's coming. He says, you know Dante's Inferno? Turns out the old book from Dad's old place was an 1863 edition of Gustave Doré's illustrated masterpiece, Dante's Divine Comedy. It's what book people call the first impression with plates. And it's worth more than a fish tank. I mean, even with the fish. And I am on the phone, and I'm thinking, but that's my book. And all of a sudden, I'm kind of back there, 8 years old again, back in the old place, and I'm getting a weepy again. But I know, crying isn't going to get it back, because I'm not 8 anymore. I'm a grown man. But I know that patience might, because my brother Artie is even older than I am. And like Dad says, nobody lives forever. Thank you.